Welcome to Tisky Sour. I think we are now genuinely live. We've tried this a few times now. Wirecast is our software. Please send them emails of complaint that they are not providing your favourite left-wing media organisation with a sufficient service. I'm not sure if we even pay for the service, so we'll work this out. This is our problem.
They are so
Thank you for staying with us. This is an emergency episode because we are in a political crisis. A no-deal Brexit could happen in 8 days' time. Obviously, the House of Commons have tried to take back control, and so they could potentially delay Brexit. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But more relevant, probably, is Theresa May's overtures to Jeremy Corbyn to try and come to some kind of cross-party agreement so that something can pass in Parliament. To talk about this, I'm joined by two distinguished guests. Owen Jones, author of The Establishment, Chavs and Guardian columnist, and also friend of the show.
I'd say lifelong soulmate and companion.
The reason he's spitting that out is because he's had to say it 3 times now because we kept thinking we were live. It took us all day to write that response. And Sienna Rodgers, who is editor of Labour List.
I am, hello.
And as I've said already, but you may or may not have seen, we get her emails every morning.
How do we get these emails?
You know what, Owen? You go to labourlist.org, and then there's a box and you put in your email address and you sign up.
Are they free?
They're free.
They're free, so you'd be really silly not to.
Really silly.
They are great emails, everyone. I read them every day.
Oh, thanks, Owen.
That's not the reason for my ill-informed, stupid views. Do not blame her for those. I am entirely responsible for my stupid opinions.
All right, in case anyone has... I can't remember what I said the first time round or this time round, but I don't think I've told you that you have to share this show because I'm worried that we've lost some viewers with the failing software, but I don't want Wirecast to be the death of this episode. So
we're
please
nationalising them. The
go
People's
on.
Wirecast.
You can't nationalise everything just to make it work. Please share this on Facebook. Please share this on Twitter. As you know, as I often say, we want to do these emergency shows every time there is a political crisis. That is only possible with your kind donations, and potentially we'll upgrade the software as well. So if you already do subscribe, thank you. You are what makes this possible. If you don't, you know what our ask is. It is for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, and you can go to support.novaramedia.com so we can continue working around the clock. To the issue at hand. On Tuesday, I think it was, Theresa May, after a 5-hour-long cabinet, came out and gave a speech to the public, to the press, where she said the withdrawal agreement obviously does not have enough support from the House to get it through. So she is going to have to make overtures to Jeremy Corbyn to come and reach some sort of cross-party consensus about a Brexit deal that might be able to pass the Commons. Some people are seeing this as a trap. Some people are seeing this as a genuine development, and Theresa May finally realising that she's going to have to be a little bit more flexible and compromise. Which one of those two do you think it is? Do you think this is just purely a political trap, or a genuine piece of outreach for a consensus-type Brexit deal? Sienna?
I think it's sort of neither of those things. So obviously, like Labour members, kind of overwhelmingly, I reckon, think that it's a trap. Like, no, Jeremy, don't go there. She's forcing you to get a Brexit deal through, basically. But it's only a trap in that sense if you thought that Labour policy was to stop Brexit, which it has not been. That's not the point of the Labour Party's position. So in that sense, it's not a trap. I mean, actually, you can see it as an opportunity. First of all, it makes Jeremy look prime ministerial, right? I mean, the whole point is that the Tories, their greatest weapon, they think, is, oh, look at Jeremy, he wears, beige suits, he's not professional, you can't trust him, he's incompetent, all that stuff. But they've made themselves look so incompetent that they've gone cap in hand to the leader of the oppositions. That is embarrassing for them.
I mean, it was very weird, though, because there's clearly in Tory sort of HQ, they've made a decision that there is a danger in inviting Jeremy Corbyn for talks because it makes him look prime ministerial, it makes him look like a legitimate politician. And so to counteract that, they clearly sent out an email to all their MPs saying go on TV as often as possible calling Jeremy Corbyn a dangerous Marxist and an anti-Semite. Yeah. And it is a bit weird to do this outreach at the same time as clearly sort of undertaking a coordinated effort, including by cabinet ministers. I think I saw Matt Hancock go on TV calling him a dangerous Marxist as well. Like, in a way, that should be reason enough for the leader of the opposition to cut off talks. But I don't know, what do you think, Owen? Trap or genuine piece of outreach?
I'm the same. I think it's literally neither. I mean, it's funny those statements because I think it was Molly Goodfellow on Twitter who described Theresa May's big statements to the nation as like a work meeting that could have been an email.
Totally.
And you know, you just roll your eyes like, please. You know, I was like, broadcast. You should refuse to broadcast it. Force her to stream it on an iPhone or something instead. But no, what it is just desperation. Utter desperation. Which is, you know, what Theresa May's done is she's fed the hard Brexiteers for so long. She fed that monster, as David Cameron did for so long, thinking you throw them a bit of meat, that'll satisfy them. It doesn't. It just makes them bigger and stronger and makes them want
Like
the next
gremlins with water.
Very similar gremlins, but less charming and cute and cuddly. But so basically, you know, she said no Brexit is better than no deal is better than a bad deal. Came out with a bad deal. And now I have no sympathies for the hard Brexiteers, but you know it is a bad deal, and she did say that no deal was better than a bad deal. But what she's done is she's realised she can't get her deal through Parliament. That no deal would break her party and break the country as well. The history books are already not going to be kind. She spent the last 3 years wrestling with David Cameron on who can be the worst prime minister on their own terms since Lord North lost the American colonies in the 18th century, but going down in history, and she's Tory to her bones. You know, she was a local, you know, she was in the local Tory association. She did, you know, she spent rainy nights stuffing Tory leaflets through doors. She was for years a councillor. She wasn't like David Cameron, this PR guy who just waltzed in and said, "I want to be prime minister because I think I'd be good at it," which is quite funny in hindsight. So she does not want to go down in history as that person. But she's ended up in a situation where she can't get, no deal, she realises, is not an option. A general election, the Tories face disaster by their own private and public admission. Therefore, the only option left is to try and get this through on Labour votes. Now, as you've said, they spent the last 3-4 years very dangerously demonising and delegitimising the leader of the opposition in particular and the left in general as terrorist-loving, Marxist, anti-Semitic, Britain-hating extremists, which has been very dangerous because it's fuelled and radicalised a large section or significant section of the political right in this country. But they, you know, so she is in that sense they're legitimising him in a way that they were desperate to avoid. But my understanding is this, because this is just an act of desperation, and you're kind of tempted to read in a Machiavellian strategy, but it's giving them too much credit for strategic analysis where there is none.
Yeah.
They genuinely did this as an act of desperation, but they're internally divided about whether it's a good idea. So on the one hand, you've got the Chief of Staff, Gavin Barwell, who lost his seat at the last election. You've got David Lidington, who's the de facto Deputy Prime Minister. They want a deal, by all accounts. But Robbie Gibb, who is the Director of Communications, as Nick Bowles, the former Conservative MP, put it the other day, does not want a deal with the Labour Party at all. So I think the danger is, well, not the danger, what's obviously going to happen is these deals are not going to work because she's not going to be able to concede or capitulate, which is what the conditions would have to be to a Labour Brexit, because it would stop being a Tory Brexit if it's no longer about basically polluted oceans and chlorinated chicken and a race to the bottom and workers' rights. If they got legally enshrined commitments, which could not then be reversed by Boris Johnson or whoever succeeds Theresa May, on workers' rights, environmental rights, on dynamic alignment with the single market plus a customs union, if that could not be reversed, that would no longer be a Tory Brexit. We would be leaving the European Union, but not in a race to the bottom deregulation, the dreams of the Tory Brexiteers. But I don't see how that's possible for her to do that without breaking her party in the way the Corn Laws did to the Conservative Party in the 19th century. So my own view is Labour had to talk to and negotiate with her. And do you remember when they refused to do that? And it didn't go down well. They were very stung by it.
That and then the walking out because Chucker's in the room thing it's hilarious, obviously. But going to get a load of bad press. So this time it's like, let's entertain this for as long as possible.
I mean, it's a bit of a game of poker, isn't it? Because, I mean, I think neither side actually want a deal.
I don't know about that, really. I think the Labour leadership want a deal. They want to get, if she agreed to Jeremy's 5 demands for Brexit, brilliant.
They'd be happy with that.
That's Labour's Brexit.
Because I think even if he went in there and asked for a customs union and alignment to the single market, for one, and Theresa May agrees, right? For one, that would split the Tory party, but two, he doesn't know who's going to be Prime Minister next.
Yeah, but
so
there
if
are
they do
some
manage to
safeguards
avoid a
against
general
that.
election, what are the safeguards against that?
Really
So
important.
yeah, I mean there was so BuzzFeed published something today. One idea is something called a Devo lock. So giving some of the devolved assemblies in places like that, like Scotland and Wales and stuff, they could have a power of veto over any future changes about customs union. So
that would mean we would be in a permanent customs union, because the Welsh Assembly and the Scottish Parliament would be able to veto any attempt to end a customs union. So yeah, I mean,
I just wanted to get, because I haven't read that story, but so just so I understand it. So for me, the reason it seems like whatever Theresa May agrees, it's just promises, is because the withdrawal agreement isn't up for debate. That's the only legally binding part of the
and we're
deal
talking about
with
the political
EU.
declaration.
we're talking about legislation.
Yeah, but legislation, we have the sovereignty of Parliament, so anything can be overridden by a future
Yeah, of
Tory,
course. But if they get a majority of MPs to change the law, then a future hard Brexiteer, Tory Prime Minister, would somehow then have to assemble another majority to reverse all of those things, which they wouldn't be able to do. They'd have to call a general election, but we'd be fine with having a general election.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point. It would be legally enshrined on dynamic alignment with the, in terms of workers' rights, environmental rights, that we would, in legislation, mean that we would not be able to go have any worse conditions that exist in the EU. And we would have a customs union with that lock, which in practice would mean we would never leave the customs union, and then have the sort of trade deal that the hard Brexiteers want with Donald Trump, which would be a race to the bottom in terms and conditions on environment, consumer protections and workers' rights. So no, in theory, you can do a deal on that basis. I think Labour would be happy with that, because they would get basically what would be a soft Brexit. The vast majority of people wouldn't notice it. There wouldn't be an economic shock. The Conservative Party would be split. A lot of people, there's a chunk of Remainers, understandably, given how awful this whole situation is, for them, it's second referendum or bust, not interested in anything else. They will be very angry to begin with, but after a few months, when most people just move on and we start talking about the NHS and child poverty and workers' rights and the housing crisis again, people would, I think, move on. But the issue is, I don't see that happening, because I do not see how Theresa May can break her party, which it would, because the large majority of MPs, Tory MPs, do not want a customs union, let alone dynamic alignment with the single market.
Yeah, the whole point of Brexit for most of them is independent trade policy. So, yeah, I mean, even more, for her, actually, but this is what I think is the interesting thing about these talks. I think May and Corbyn are much, there's not actually, if she really is ready to concede on customs union and all those other demands, there's not actually much separating them. It's actually more separating, May from her party and Jeremy from the membership in terms of wanting another referendum. That's actually where the splits are, rather than between the two of them. And that's why the talks aren't going to work.
Because the argument has also been made that if, this was in the FT today, that if they manage to come to an agreement which is customs union and single market alignment, it might not, even if both front benches agree, it might not even pass in Parliament, because you've got a parliamentary Labour Party which has, I suppose, radicalised since a year ago in terms of a lot of them will not accept anything short of a people's vote. So I think if Theresa May had made these overtures 2 years ago, then the parliamentary Labour Party and probably the public could have got used to the idea of a soft Brexit. But because it's gone this far and reversing Brexit seems so realistic, that has created a radicalisation, basically. And you'd see lots of resignations. We've already seen Emily Thornberry send an email to every member of the PLP saying that Jeremy Corbyn should not agree to anything that doesn't involve a people's vote or a confirmatory referendum.
Yeah, I mean, there is in theory a majority for a soft Brexit in Parliament. I mean, what we saw with the oh God,
indicative votes.
What is wrong with it? It's been a long few days, weeks, months, years. Indicative votes is that the soft Brexit options in theory had the least opposition to them. So they weren't the most popular because the second referendum, but it technically got more support, but actually it was more opposed. Because what happened is a lot of the people, or a significant chunk of second referendum people's vote people, refused to back the soft Brexit options, which allowed it to fail. Both Ken Clarke's amendment on customs union and the Nick Boles amendment on Common Market 2.0. Now, most Labour MPs did vote for those.
And a lot of people's voters voted for them as well, but some people just wouldn't compromise. I found it quite funny that quite a few people who rebelled just last year on the EEA amendment, they defied the whip to vote for it, then voted against or abstained this time on Common Market 2.0, which is basically the same thing. 9
of the 11 independent group, Change UK, whatever they're called.
Also them. Yeah.
They rebelled against the Labour whip and then to support the EEA, and now when that was proposed as an option again, they voted against it.
And you were saying earlier, because we were talking about those indicative votes and the idea that the people's vote, or a second referendum, or a confirmatory referendum, or whatever you want to call it, that to me got a surprising number of Labour MPs behind it. So there was 198 that voted for a second referendum and only 27 voted against. I think that would have surprised many people 6 months ago.
Abstentions as well, obviously.
Well, abstentions would have been, on top of that. But I mean, 198 voting for it, I thought was significant. But you were saying earlier that you think that doesn't necessarily indicate that there's 198 MPs that actually support a second referendum.
I don't think so, for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, there were people that were trying to do deals. So the Common Market 2.0 people, that's a cross-party group, but the Labour people are Lucy Powell and Stephen Kinnock. Lucy voted for the confirmatory vote motion twice, but Stephen changed from abstain to yes the second time because he thought he could bring over some people to the Common Market 2.0 because he had, the Labour whip, the SNP whip, and it had a much better chance second time round. But then, quite a few people still just didn't compromise at all. And
is that Labour MPs as well, or is that mainly Tiggers?
Oh, it's all Tiggers, but also lots of Labour MPs, and they were really disappointed by that. The fact that people had been so, unwilling to compromise that they didn't vote for their incredibly soft Brexit option, which as I said, they had defied the whip to vote for just last year.
Stephen Kinnock was very publicly angry about that. He felt that he had, as someone who supports Common Market 2.0, lent his vote to People's Vote, which he doesn't support, but on the basis that they would reciprocate, and they didn't. So there's a bit of ill will there. And, I do think people need to realise this, because for a long time there's been the sense that Jeremy Corbyn has this Stop Brexit red button in his possession, which out of kind of spite he refuses to press. The truth is, there is a very significant chunk of the Parliamentary Labour Party who are not Corbynistas, or they're not people from the left. They're people like Melanie On up in Grimsby, who represent Leave communities, who sent leaflets to their constituents promising and said on their doorsteps they would not do anything to reverse Brexit. So they see that they made that solemn promise. It doesn't matter if the Labour leadership put a metaphorical gun to their heads, they're not going to vote for a second referendum. There isn't the majority there because the vast majority of Tory MPs don't want it. So even if you add on the Nats and the Libs and the TIGs and all the other acronyms we now have, you don't have a majority there. There is a majority for there's far less opposition to a soft Brexit within Parliament than there is to a second referendum. The problem is with the country, though, and this is, we do need to engage with this, which is there hasn't been any real significant shift in terms of how people voted in the referendum. I know people will say the average Remain does have a lead, but before the referendum campaign started, Remain had a very, very significant lead over Leave, and then the referendum campaign started. We effectively have a Remain campaign in full swing and have done for a long time. We don't with the Leave campaign. But what's happened in the electorate, I would say, the success of the continuity Remain campaigns has been to radicalise or whip up more anger amongst existing Remain voters who are more angry about the situation than they were before, which is very understandable. And with Leave voters, you've got a similar parallel radicalisation, which is we voted to leave, the political elite are trying to subvert our vote, why haven't we left yet? And that middle ground in the electorate then has shrunk. And Labour privately say, Lotto will say, a lot of them, when they look, if you look at, for example, the Revoke Article 50 petition, there is a significant chunk of the British population in the electorate who are now very angry Remainers who you can't ignore. It's not like sometimes we mock about the FBPE people on Twitter who just often, I get their tweets, I'm like, send me a time machine so I can vote Leave or something. No, because they're so infuriating and insensitive. They don't just hate Leavers, they're angry at other Remainers who they regard as traitors to the Remain cause. But it is true that, there is a chunk in the population who have got angry, A, because of how awful the whole situation is, and B, because the continuity Remain campaigns have kind of said, well, look, this whole referendum campaign was illegitimate, the result anyway, and this is lies, and we're throwing ourselves off a cliff. And we've got to be empathetic about that, about both Leavers who are angry and Remainers who are angry, and that's very difficult because the middle ground of wanting a deal which reconciles a referendum result with the future of the country, a soft Brexit deal, that middle ground, I mean, it's funny for radical leftists to be talking about middle ground and compromise, but that middle ground, so we can move on to talking about the things that really matter.
Middle ground on things we don't really give a shit about, and
Well, it's just not the
then we shift the agenda when it's stuff we care about. So if
to
it's
radical economic
formal
change,
trading relationships with the European Union is going, I want to keep people on side.
It wasn't
so
the hill I wanted to die on, and I'm not going to die on it. So.
Yeah, I think Lisa Nandy has been really good on the stuff that you're talking about how, just everyone, basically, so many people just have this like fuck it attitude now of either revoke Article 50, not even bother with a referendum, just straight up revoke it, or no deal. Yeah, definitely.
And that's shit. But I do think there is a silent majority. No, I think there is a very significant chunk.
Silent majority is very powerful. I mean, history shows,
But there is a very... I don't know if it's a majority, because the election...
So are noisy minorities, I mean...
But I think that there is a very significant chunk of the population...
Just making broad, meaningless claims over here, sorry.
But they are sick of it, and they just... A lot of people do want to press a button of make this go away so we can just talk...
Yeah, either way.
Exactly, and I'm in... I put myself in that category. I mean, when people say often, oh, well, you, Corbyn, you on the left have become triangulating Blairites... The reason I refute that is the whole point of Blairism is you triangulate on everything. We're talking about a very specific policy area, which is our relationship with a trading bloc. I'm not saying that isn't important, of course it is. But obviously, the whole point that all of us come into left-wing politics is we want to transform society by redistributing wealth and power from the minority to the majority. Whatever shades of opinion we are on the left, that is a common kind of cause in theory. So, to want to shift back to that ground, and in my view have radical answers to it, means you do need to settle, because this is now a culture war which divides our communities in very unhealthy ways. And, we can prolong this agony forever, or we can come up with a deal which says the referendum was won narrowly by Leave, and then the electorate a year later elected a soft Brexit majority in Parliament, and therefore that's the compromise we should have.
Sienna, you have contacts with a lot of Labour MPs, obviously. It seems to me that there are a number of them who are radicalised in the sense that, well, not in the sense of like how we normally say radicalised.
I know,
that sounds a bit bad.
I've come up with reasonably or otherwise with a position that unless there is a public vote, I'm not happy with whatever compromise is reached. I can't vote for anything that doesn't involve a second referendum. How many people in the PLP do you think that now includes?
Yeah, I've been asking MPs that exact question. I've gotten estimates from, the latest one was like 65 plus, the last MP said. I think...
Of people who flat out vote against a soft Brexit.
Well, people who, basically at this point won't vote for May's deal plus customs union or Labour's Brexit or whatever. That, they just want, final say on any deal. And it could be more than that even. I think a good approximation is I was keeping track of all the MPs who'd come out in favour of a people's vote before Labour kind of made that shift properly, and that list was 80 something, so it's something around that, I think. The people who, but there were some recent converts as well who are now proper hardcore on it.
And to what extent do you think, actually this is a sort of different question actually. For a while we saw the people's vote as the second referendum people, as people weaponising an issue to try and damage Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think that's now gone out of the window because the front bench have taken on that position, and anyone who's now backing a public vote genuinely wants it? Or do you think some people are still doing it to sort of virtue signal to the Remainer base and to try and undermine a leader who's still, whilst the party has gone towards a people's vote, clearly not emotionally committed to having a second referendum?
I think it's all of that. I think it involves a whole spectrum, because there are people genuinely that what they're most passionate about, they're from the left, and then what they're most passionate about is like freedom of movement, for instance. I wrote up yesterday just some comments after a lobby huddle from a Corbyn spokesman, and it went like ridiculous numbers because people are so angry about the fact that Labour's just confirmed that it still thinks it wants Brexit, and it thinks Brexit means ending freedom of movement. They're so angry about that. They don't give a shit about independent trade policy. It's not about customs union, which is the ironic thing about Labour's Brexit, is that actually it's the single market that they care about. But so that's why I think it includes all of those people. Of course, people still pushing the people's vote stuff just to undermine Jeremy, but it's also left-wingers.
Exactly. I think that's so important that you have, for example, Lloyd Russell Moyle and Clive Lewis, who are very much on the left. They're very firmly on the left, who are very attached to the Remain cause and regard this as an anti-migrant neoliberal project, and obviously the Tory Brexit project is an anti-migrant neoliberal project. Others would say, well, Brexit can be defined as lots of different things, and obviously if a deal is negotiated, it doesn't innately have to be that at all. It's about a relationship with the EU. But that is their view in good faith, the left Remain faction. And then you have the right, and I think they're divided between... I think, there are those on the right who just genuinely think Brexit is awful and terrible, and they would see it more of this as an affront to this liberal values system. But then there are others, and I think it varies with the MP about the importance of it, who just see it as a wedge issue to put between the membership and much of the voting base and the leadership. And this is something where they can be, look, we're being radical and anti-Tory. And it works in that way, because you can say, well, the argument is they're Tory stooges, they're part of this right-wing project, they're propping it up with a base and a membership which are very angry about this whole situation and got more angry about it. And I think, we have to be aware that Remain is a... Continuity Remain is a broad spectrum. The problem is the official leaders of the Continuity Remain campaigns are the kind of neoliberal, right-wing, Blairite, Cameroon factions who would probably, and some are open about, would prefer Brexit to a Corbyn-led government. So they see, so it is complicated, because it's not like you have these charlatans going, well, to be honest with you, I don't mind about Brexit. I just want to damage Corbyn and the left.
I'm the opposite. I don't care about Brexit. I just want Corbyn to win.
Well, we want socialism. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting socialism and wanting a deal that is pragmatic about what we do with the EU.
Was it love socialism, hate Brexit? It's love socialism, somewhat agnostic about
Yeah,
Brexit.
which I think that's where I am. But you do get some of them are hate Corbyn, hate Brexit, and they mean both of those things.
Yeah.
Others are more emphasise the hate Corbyn and the hate Brexit thing is kind of useful.
I think the people most likely to take that position, left the party recently, which actually kind of took some of their power away, because no longer are they a faction within Labour saying all that stuff. Actually, is it worth reporting on? Oh, someone who's not a Labour MP is criticising Labour? Not really. So, that it was kind of a benefit in that way.
I mean, there's an argument that hasn't been worth reporting on for 3 years.
Well, no.
Labour's statement yesterday, or the statement from Labour's spokesperson, that Labour are still of the position that when we leave the EU, freedom of movement will end, and that is a position that the Labour Party supports. What do you make of that? Was that politically correct? Was that morally correct? Difficult question.
It is a difficult question. Obviously, I think Lotto just thinks that they want to respect the result of the 2016 referendum, and they think that means people voted to end freedom of movement. I mean, it's difficult to say because it was a slim margin, and you can't say that all of the 52% had that in mind. You can't say that. Obviously, immigration did play a massive role in that campaign, but you can't say that was everyone's number one priority in leaving the EU. It could be sovereignty, blah, 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 all those other issues.
Yeah, I mean, I find it depressing because the leading lights of this project, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott, were, when it was lonely and horrible to make the case for refugees and migrants. Look, what was the first act Jeremy Corbyn did when he got elected leave the Labour Party? He went to a refugee rally, and the same people who now attack him for abandoning the case on freedom of movement were the same people who attacked him for going to a refugee rally on the basis it was terrible political optics. And the people back in 2015, in May 2015, when Labour lost, there were three main reasons: the economy, we weren't seen as economic credible because we didn't back cuts enough; social security, we didn't back cuts on social security enough; and we were seen as too pro-immigration. That faction have pivoted in the commentariat and within the political elite when the people they're targeting to saying, they're now anti-migrant and all the rest of it. Obviously, Corbyn, McDonnell, and Diane Abbott, they would, did protests, sparsely attended protests against deportations, against Yarl's Wood Detention Centre. But they have since the referendum, in a depressing way in my opinion, abandoned the case for why migrants are not responsible for the crimes and injustices caused by the powerful. There have been exceptions to that. Diane Abbott has made in particular some, I think, very eloquent and powerful contributions, but there's not been a consistent argument made. Even actually, as polling shows that people's opinions have shifted on migration, it's more positive than it was, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But actually, having looked into it, my instinctive reaction when I saw that was irritation and anger. And you know, we do as a left need to hold them to account. And if we end up with a Labour government, which I think we will, you know, we will still have to protest and mobilise on issues. These people at the top of the Labour leadership do not genuinely believe that ending freedom of movement is a good thing. They actually think freedom of movement is a good thing. But I do think we need to pivot more to talking about migrants' rights and refugees' rights as well. It will be the most pro-refugee government we've ever had in the history of this country. But on the issue of when they say freedom of movement ends, they're doing this glib technical thing about what happens when we leave the European Union. But that doesn't mean, and this is very important, that what they then negotiate in its place will almost certainly, particularly if we have dynamic alignment with the single market, will almost certainly just be the same thing. And actually, the policies they will put in place, such as, for example, policies to crack down on exploitation of migrant workers by...
Or all workers.
No, I know, but the specific issue of, for example, private landlords and who, you know, stuff, you know, huge numbers of extremely poor migrant workers in, you know, 10 in a bedroom, that kind of thing. But also to stop the undercutting of wages by because that's the same, you know, agency workers, wherever they're from, can be used to undercut wages. That's not the agency workers' fault. But in terms of having a genuine living wage, enforcing workers' rights, extending trade union rights, all of those, and ending the housing crisis, all of those will deal with the grievances that fuel anti-migrant scapegoating, and that's what a Labour government would do. I think in practice, the next Labour government will de facto keep freedom of movement as we see it within the EU and strengthen migrant rights and introduce policies that defend their conditions. But, and there's a big but here, they are not making a powerful, compelling, consistent argument in support of migrants, which is what they think. That's their conscience. You know, they genuinely, you know, if you go to their offices like Dan Abbott, you have kind of pro-migrant kind of posters and leaflets everywhere. You know, these people, that is for them. I remember when Shami Chakrabarti and Dan Abbott went to Yarlswood Detention Centre and, you know, did this big, you know, that was seen by Blairism and as political suicide. You'd never do something like that. So they genuinely have that conviction. They genuinely believe that fighting for migrants' rights, as well as refugees, is the right thing to do. But they haven't been making that consistent argument for the reasons you say. And I think we need to put pressure on that, because if they're going to de facto keep freedom of movement, which I think they will, you can't do that unless you make a powerful argument for it. Particularly if we end up with Common Market 2.0, which means freedom of movement with an emergency break.
Because then it allows people to make the accusation they did during the Blair era of you didn't make an argument for it and you slipped, you know, you let all these people in, you opened the doors, blah, 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 and you didn't actually tell the country what was going on and all that stuff.
That is such an important point, because that's what New Labour did. Under New Labour, we did have a massive increase in migration, but you had the worst of both worlds. Because, and to be fair, they wouldn't do this. They you know, you'd have the likes of David Blunkett and others making awful reactionary statements about migrants and refugees. And also, on refugees, they did do reactionary policies in practice, like vouchers and so on, humiliating policies for refugees. But you ended up where people could see that, you know, the housing crisis got worse because we didn't build housing, and migration increased, and we didn't make the case, or they didn't make the case, for why that, you know, what was going on, and make a positive case for it. So you ended up with economic insecurity got worse on things like housing, and you were using derogatory terms about migrants and refugees, and migration's increased. And we obviously that won't happen, but we do need a powerful, passionate, consistent case made for migrants and refugees.
I mean, I think to some degree that has happened this time around. So, I mean, I think an alternate thing Labour could have done is when they're asked, will freedom of movement end? They say, look, there was a referendum, we lost, we're going to leave the EU, and when we leave the EU, freedom of movement will end. But we need to be clear that we as a political party believe that migration makes Britain stronger, migration makes our communities stronger, migration, it does make our economy stronger, but that's not the only important thing about it. You know, some of our most valued members and voters are people who are migrants from other countries. So I think they could have made a sort of almost a deflationary argument where it says sort of like, look, the vote happened means that we're leaving the EU, that means freedom of movement's ending, but here's young. Whereas I think what they did is they sort of post facto tried to justify the leave vote by saying, oh yeah, I mean, migration does kind of undercut wages and da-da-da-da-da. So they ended up making a bunch of fundamentally anti-migrant
Because
arguments because they wanted to post facto say, oh, we always agreed with you, actually.
No, I think the problem is that because we've had this vicious anti-migrant campaign by the Tories and the Tory press, it needed a very strong counterweight, and I think there has been attempts, by movements and activists to try and shift and push back on that. But you end up where you get that campaign. It's not like Labour have particularly fueled that, and you have had interventions, not least by Dan Abbott, to combat that. But when they say glibly, freedom of movement will end and we will have replaced with a fair migration system, that is left to interpretation on purpose.
Yeah, completely.
And
I'm not cutting them off there in terms of quoting them. That's literally all they will say, and they won't say anything further to that. So yeah.
So they won't go instead, which is what we want them to do.
Exactly.
But we will say they make these statements occasionally, just not in a consistent fashion, which is we will stand against passionately the scapegoating of migrants for the injustices caused by the powerful. And we think migrants are pillars of our society. They believe that, they passionately actually believe in all those things, but I think they felt nervous about making that case.
Yeah,
as public opinion shifted, actually.
Yeah, I think there are loads of clever arguments that Labour is kind of missing out on about this at the moment as well, because I mean, I know from I was an MP's caseworker, and I really had no idea what was going on in terms of immigration policy and UKVI and Home Office, and what a mess the whole thing is, and what the experiences that people have to go through until I was a caseworker. And the main thing that we need to get across is Tory incompetence actually is leading to so much suffering, but it's
I'm just telling Owen to sit up. Someone in the comments told me to tell Owen to sit up.
Oh, am I hiding my stupid face?
You were slouching.
I am a sloucher.
Yeah,
I've always been a sloucher. Bad for my back.
Posture's very important.
Know,
the audience noticed.
Got to sound like my primary school teacher.
Sorry, go on.
But yeah, it's connected to the Windrush stuff. But the fact that they have such punitive immigration policies actually leads to complete incompetence, which means that there are people I remember dealing with cases where constituents get in touch, be like, right, I haven't heard back from my application, and I've got discretionary leave to remain, all that stuff, and we contact the Home Office, and they go, oh, well, the thing is that they're actually a terrorist and they committed war crimes, and we go, oh, but they've got permission to work and everything. And it's literally only because one of them was cab driver or whatever. It was only because the Home Office had such a massive backlog of cases that they could not deal with in any way that that it was leading to stuff like that. So I think that's an argument to be made as well, is that actually it leads to consequences that no one would be happy about.
Definitely.
We've talked about Labour's strategy going into these talks, the risks going into these talks, but what's actually going to happen? So unless some kind of extension is agreed, we will be leaving the EU with no deal next Friday, I think. Is that the 12th? The 12th is next Friday?
Yes.
Because it was a 2-week extension.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Will we be leaving with no deal? And if not, what outcome do we expect in the next few days? Sienna?
Well, we're not going to be leaving with no deal, I don't think, because she has basically said, that's not happening, it's not happening. And of course we can't really, trust what Theresa May says, it's all this bullshit. But she's not going to take that risk. She knows the economic fallout. She knows that, she hasn't made the preparations for no deal, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think the most likely thing is at this point that there's going to be a long extension, which, personally I think is very messy and not ideal.
I agree. I mean, no deal I've always thought was just never, ever, ever going to happen. And it was used as a means to try and corral people into voting for Theresa May's deal. Parliament regardless of what Theresa May personally thinks, Parliament just is not going to allow it. And we chatted about that petition to revoke Article 50. I think they would, if it came to that close to the very end, they'd revoke rather than let that happen.
Although Parliament has been super pathetic on binding votes on this matter. But yeah, we'd assume that the day before the crunch moment, they surely wouldn't let it happen.
Something would happen. They would intervene, and there are things they can do at that moment. But I just don't think the government would allow it. I mean, I do think it's fascinating how the Tories have partially decoupled from their social base, big business, because of the infusion of right-wing populism, because they are supposed to be the political wing of big business, and in large part they are, and big business are kind of going, what are you doing? Because obviously they don't want no deal. Well, the vast majority of them don't.
They'll still back the Tories, though.
Of course, they'll always back them to the bitter end, particularly against, the red hordes.
Yeah.
This is not like Tony Blair would come to power. This would be a government that would radically redistribute wealth and power, but they regard no deal as lunacy. I just don't think. I think that link would kick in at that point as well. So I think no deal is just not going to happen, and I think inevitably there will be a long extension, which for the Tory Brexiteers, the hard Brexiteers, they regard as just a means to stop Brexit from happening, full stop. And part of the reason they reached out to Labour in this way, we said before, wasn't quite a trap, wasn't quite a genuine offer, and that's true. But I think in their heads they are thinking, we'll use the likely collapse of these talks to say we've tried everything. A long extension now is the only possible means forward, and they can say to the EU as well, because the three conditions for the EU in practice for long extension, the 27 governments have to accept it, are either a general election, a referendum, or Parliament is coalescing in some sense, or there are, the basis of a deal, a different deal taking shape. So she could make that argument then, I suppose, to the EU.
The talks won't collapse next week, and she can pretend they're still going on?
Potentially, a lot. Well, it depends.
I mean, there's a few options, and I think Labour strategy does come in here actually, because I think what would be potentially useful for her is if instead of an agreement from these negotiations as to what kind of Brexit we'll have, whether it be customs union or single market alignment or whatever, you come out with a roadmap. So you sort of say both parties have committed to a process whereby a consensus will be reached about what sort of Brexit we'll have, but we need 9 months to do it. So give us this long ass extension, and then I think that would be enough for the EU to give it to us. We'd have to sit in European Parliament elections or whatever. But then Labour have committed themselves. It seems in a way cost-free. It would keep both parties together. But in a way, that's given the Tories too much, because if we don't give them that, then the EU are going to demand either you get no deal or a general election or a referendum. So it's potentially in Labour's interest to say, like, look, we don't want to keep kicking the can down the road any longer. We'll only settle for one of two things, which is a general election or a second referendum. I mean, I don't think they will do that because it hasn't been their policy up to now. Their policy up to now has been, if you're willing to sit down with us, we are willing to try and negotiate a soft Brexit over the next, and 9 months presumably is a long enough time to do it. Can
I say about long extension? What's your, I mean, if I were going to be all cynical, I think it is, I worry about long extension just because it's dragging out what is it's sucking the oxygen out of every other political issue. It's entrenching divisions. It's a culture war. But a long extension is going to cause the Tories far more problems than the Labour Party in terms of the Tory Brexit. If one of the goals is, in my opinion, getting a viable solution to Brexit, which I'm very pragmatic about, to be honest, and plus the shattering of the Conservatives as a political force, and not just a defeat, because we can't just have, in my opinion, Labour winning with a majority of 10, because I don't think they'll be able to get a lot of their policy agenda through.
With our current crop of MPs, 10 is not enough.
So I think, and also if you're
we've got 100 rebels for lack of a
also we need to be at least a 2-term, 3-term government. So the bigger the majority, the more you can do, and the longer you're likely to stay in office. So that is obviously is putting country before party, because people say that just sounds like politicking and partisanship. The Tories are the source of this nation's calamity. We are in the worst crisis in peacetime since 45, one of the worst in peacetime in modern history, because of Tory rule, whether it be the economic policies of the 80s that caused social dislocation, austerity, plus their partisan games during the 2010s. So we need to get rid of the Conservative Party and replace it with a government that will take on the injustices, the burning injustices, to coin a phrase, which led to Brexit in the first place. So I think a long extension will fuel the Tory civil war.
They're certainly going to be angrier about it than anyone in the Labour Party. I think the Labour Party, people are like, oh, it's legally complicated. There's all this weird shit about having to hold European elections. Like even Keir Starmer, who's obviously a lot more, warm to the idea of another referendum, says like it's very legally complicated. We kind of want to avoid all that. But they're not like incandescent.
What's the basis of that? Why is it legally complicated to have a 9-month extension?
I think just because participating in the elections and then taking back all our MEPs and all that sort of, it's like what?
No. Think about the MEPs.
Yeah, they'll all have been searching on Gumtree for their flats in Brussels, just as we were talking earlier about their
salaries and expenses.
Not bad.
$8 grand a month.
Why don't you
$6 grand a month?
Are you thinking about it?
Well, if it's only for 9 months, why not?
Got to do something with his time.
No, we're all backing Euro Shanley movement. Hashtag Euro Shanley. Max Shanley for
Yeah,
MEP.
so loads of people replied that to my article on Labour selecting MPs, and I was like, I don't understand. I'm not in the loop enough to understand what that means. What is it? Please explain it
So
to
Max
me.
Shanley, you know
Yeah,
Max Shanley?
yeah, I
He's
do.
The icon, the legend, the
He does a
hero.
podcast on Novara Media. All
Right.
the best. Listen to it. Well, it's a popular grassroots social media campaign to get Max Shanley into the European Parliament.
I'm campaigning for him.
Okay.
If he's there, I'll campaign for him.
There's free endorsements here. Actually, I don't know. Maybe it's premature to announce your endorsement. I don't know. You had an exclusive today about
Yes.
Labour have announced their process for selecting MEPs.
Yeah, I mean...
Any surprises?
Not really. It's as simple as that. It's an incredibly short, quick timetable. Where there are vacancies, like people, they don't have very long to submit their applications, basically, because it's all going to be expedited. Everyone's got to get on with this process very, very quickly. That's it, really.
All right, guys, start writing some questions. It's question time. While you're doing that, maybe I forgot to say before, but please like this video because it means it appears in more people's news feeds. And, obsessed with viewing figures I am. That's all I do this for. Also, you know that the only thing that makes Novara Media possible is your kind donations. So if you already are a subscriber, thank you. You're what makes this possible. If you are not, our ask is the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Please go to support.novaramedia.com to become a supporter. Let's see. Have I got any questions coming through yet? Question. Would these two things avoid a trap? From Anthony Wright. This is dangerous because I haven't read the question before I'm reading it out. Could be anything coming on next. Would these two things avoid a trap? Turn the customs union backstop into a customs union backstop with a say. Interesting. Tag a general election onto back end of May's deal. So the idea is, so at the moment, one problem, so say Tom Kabassi came on the show and he said, actually the backstop's shit. The backstop's shit because it binds us into the customs union. And we wouldn't have any say over that. So
and his argument is there are 100 or so countries in the world in about 12 different customs unions, and all of them have a say, with the exception of Turkey and a few very small countries. So you can have a customs union with a say. Yeah.
So this question is saying, could we put in the backstop a customs union instead of the customs union? It's quite technical.
Well, that's exactly what Labour's trying to do, isn't it?
Yeah, but could you put that in the withdrawal? Well, I suppose actually the answer to that is we're not allowed to change the withdrawal agreement in the next 2 weeks. So you need a long extension for any of this to come into play.
Yeah.
And I don't think you could get a general election into a deal because the whole point is the only way for us to get a general election is for Labour to cause a crisis in the Tory party, which cannot continue. We need some ERG hardliner backbenchers to vote no confidence in Theresa May.
The problem is, I think some of them are thinking that, but the independent group are going to prop them up.
Yeah.
The independent group are so terrified of a general election, for good reasons, they'll lose all their seats instantly, that they are willing to prop up a Brexit Tory government.
Yeah, that really fucked up the whole idea of the good thing about like any sort of, this is incredibly cynical obviously, and Romania's going to hate me for saying this, but any sort of Brexit deal going through would have to include a backstop, and DUP then pull support, and that means general election, right? That was like the only like upside of that. And TIG saying that they'll vote with the government in any confidence vote really fucked that up.
P. Carr asks, if Labour are complicit in overturning the 2016 result, how many decades will it be before we see a Labour government? It's a very leading question there.
Yeah.
I suppose one could
Is
rephrase.
that Ian Lavery?
One could Ian Lavery and John Trickett both have P. Carr as a YouTube account which they share. Do you think if we end up overturning the referendum from 2016, that will deny us the chance for power at the next general election, or
this is what
general elections for decades to come?
This is why, despite the fact, I get very angry dads screaming in my mentions all the time, I just think Labour's position was essentially correct all this time, which was to accept the referendum result and try and enact a result which was as unifying as possible based on the fact it was a close result, and protected the economy, workers' rights, environmental rights and consumer rights. And no one can say that Labour hasn't tried to do that, despite the fact that a very significant, very large lobby has angrily denounced them for doing so, rather than reversing Brexit and having another referendum. It may well be. Look, I still don't think there's not a majority referendum in Parliament anyway. If a referendum is the only way of stopping a no-deal Brexit, then we're stuck with it. But a second referendum, in my opinion, would be far more vicious than the last, and which unleashed terrible demons in our society. I think
gremlins.
It's
like giving gremlins water.
Less kind of cuddly than those gremlins, but also, I think Leave have a very good chance of winning that. Their slogan is "Tell them again." I spend a lot of time in Leave communities, and people are more angry, and I think some Remainers would end up voting Leave as well. People who voted Remain last time. It's certainly not in the bag for Remain. So I think trying to make this work without damaging the economy and, very importantly, hard-won workers, consumer, environmental rights is the right thing to do. Labour have tried to do that. So I don't think anyone can say Labour haven't tried to reverse the...
No, I mean, I guess what they're talking about is if they put a public vote as a condition on supporting any deal.
If
that's
we end up
what
with
they're
a
talking
people's
about,
vote
right?
because Labour backed it, I suppose. Because
Yeah,
I suppose the
that's
idea, if we back a people's vote and it doesn't happen, people will forget. But if it is Labour that is responsible for the people's vote, then people will remember that.
Yeah.
So if Labour is responsible for
I
a
think
people's
there are
vote
so many problems
and then Remain wins,
with it.
do you think that would destroy our electoral chances, or do you think that's being
I just
overstated?
think that the second referendum in itself has so many problems. What if the turnout, for instance, is lower?
No, yeah.
Does that mean that the result is invalid?
Because they're going about 17.4 all the time.
Yeah, exactly. The turnout was incredibly high, and so people are threatening to abstain next time. So what does that say about the next result?
What would the question be? What would the options be? Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of problems with it, and also if there's people who ran the last campaign and who are dominating continuity Remain run it again, we might as well just give up. I think, if it comes to it, Labour would have to say, we have tried everything to make this work, but they've bungled it up and our country's going down the plug hole, so we don't have a choice. But it's not a good option, in my opinion. I know a lot of people think that's, a lot of my friends think that's, a grand betrayal, but I just think avoiding another referendum and what that would do to this country is a good thing. And I think just coming up with a deal which most people won't change their lives. People are not... If it's a soft Brexit, there won't be some big economic shock. No one will notice.
People will get over it.
They won't.
Unless we get a general... So if you have... I think if Corbyn is the handmaiden to Brexit and then we have a general election within 6 months, could be very damaging. I think if it's 4 years later then and we have a soft Brexit, people will kind of have forgotten, and it will just be like...
I don't know.
We're a bit like Norway, which also isn't a sort of closed off xenophobic country.
I think the general election would just end up, if we left the European Union, it would be more likely to be about issues like poverty, the NHS, work, housing crisis.
That would be Labour's mission, is to move it on to everything else.
Which they did last time. Look, it was supposed to be the Brexit election.
Successfully did last time, exactly.
And that was seen as impossible. It was the Brexit election. Everything was about Brexit before the general election. Everything. That's the only thing we spoke about. And then in that sacred 6 weeks, we spoke about austerity and taxing the rich and public ownership of the NHS. And then after that, we all started going about customs unions again. So I think a general election, is likely. Because, as well, we'd make the argument, did not Theresa May say, when she became Prime Minister, about the burning injustices that led to Brexit? So even if you have a Brexit general election, how can you have that without talking about the things which the Prime Minister herself conceded led to Brexit in the first place? So it couldn't just be about customs unions.
Giggler says, exactly, Owen. Oh.
It's all right, don't worry.
Exactly, Owen. I will vote Leave next time, voted Remain first time. A question from Juliet Jakes. Do you think
Juliet,
committing
hello.
to end... She's got a fantastic podcast, Sweet 212.
Really good podcast.
The question is, do you think Labour committing to end free movement will harm them electorally by demoralising their campaigning canvassing base?
Well, they do need to make, and this is what we're talking about, a passionate case for migrants and refugees. And that has been, I think, sorely lacking. I don't think it's hard for them to do that. It's not hard because they genuinely believe those things. They would. It's not, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell and Diane Abbott do not need to ham it up to talk passionately and make the case for migrants and refugees, and where one ends and one begins is complex anyway, but you know what I mean. So I think they need to do that. They need to make the argument for it, and we need to build pressure from below. I personally don't think, and there was a very good thread on Twitter by Adam Payne, who works for Business Insider.
I agreed with his assessment.
Exactly, and he made the point that, yes, they're technically saying freedom of movement ends, but that doesn't mean in practice Labour are saying that somehow they are going to support this new repressive regime for EU migrants. They're not. That actually, in practice, would be the same, and actually, a lot of rights would be extended. But they're not saying it.
Yeah,
and
the
that's
whole
problem.
argument is about what Labour thinks about its optics. It's not about what it actually thinks in practice. Obviously.
Exactly. I mean, if there was a Labour government, do I think all of a sudden they're going to be EU migrants subjected to the hostile environment?
Yeah,
Absolutely no way. Do I think the hostile environment will be in place for migrants outside the EU? Absolutely not. And I think, we would
I trust that they'll be shutting detention centres.
Yeah, Oswald will go.
Yeah.
So I think that is the case, but they do need to make the case. It was like New Labour. New Labour was often, obviously very right-wing and reactionary and didn't undo a lot of what Thatcherism did. But even when they did good things, they pretended they didn't. They actually presented themselves as even more right-wing than they were, and that demoralised people. So I think they do need to make the case for what they're saying. Also because we need to change attitudes, and we know... I think one of the reasons pro-migrant attitudes have improved is because you have a Labour leadership which keeps saying you should be angry at bankers, you should be angry at tax dodgers, you should be angry at poverty paying bosses. So a lot of anger has shifted in that direction rather than having this constant Dutch auction over who can be tough on migrants. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't make the case explicitly for migrants and refugees, which they should.
All right, Sienna, there's a question about Labour selections.
God,
if there is a general election this year, will there be a large turnover of Labour MPs, or do you think that if it happens in the short term, then the current crop of the PLP are pretty much secure in their
so
place?
talking about deselections.
Well, to be honest, I've somewhat modified the question.
Okay.
So 123 ABC asked, do we have a chance to vote for open selection again this year, and should we push harder for it if we do? So I think that's the idea about, should the left be pushing for a stronger mandatory reselection platform or open selection, as it's better articulated at this year's conference. That's one question. I think also an interesting question though is, if there is a general election soon, will there be a chance for members to replace their MPs? Because it's not actually that hard now. You just need a third of your
It'll
CLP
be
to want it.
really interesting to see how that rule change actually plays out. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, but you haven't got any sort of info from the NEC about what they're suggesting. If a snap general election gets called, presumably everyone just gets to keep their seat.
Same thing as usual. Everyone's automatically reselected unless something goes seriously wrong with them. Yeah. So same thing if it's a snap election. You're not going to get the chance to deselect people.
Yeah. Which brand of hair gel does Owen use? That's from Invictus.
Oh, do you know what's really annoying? Because normally what I do is I use VO5. I don't know why I'm doing product placements. Gum. But I've been using this really annoying wax which my hairdresser sold. And he's a great hairdresser. Often when I've cut my hair, I think it looks pretty good. But I'm not happy with it. It's not working for me. He said my hair was dry though, which I was...
That's not nice.
Dry?
Well, I know. He said it was a bit dry, so this would be good because it kind of makes it... But I don't like it. What do you think? I don't know. I just don't think it works.
I mean, Invictus, tell us, why did you ask? Did you ask because it looks good or because it looks bad?
It isn't good. I cycled as well, so I think my hair might be a bit...
Average Joe asks, if Labour agrees to a deal with May, that meets Labour's 6 tests. I think it's 5 now because they abandoned their 6, didn't they?
Yeah,
Will we see more Blairite MPs defect to the Cucks? So the Cucks is Change UK, Chuckers Party. Who he's not the leader of. Did you see the announcement when they announced Heidi Allen was the interim leader? And he's like, we've announced Heidi as the interim
No, but
leader.
he goes like, interim leader! He does it in this kind of interim leader! And you can see in his eyes. And then he says, that's quite deliberate because we want more Heidi Allens in politics, not because we're keeping her. And we are because...
It's to send a message, yes?
Because the initials of our party are quite literally Chuck. So there we have it.
I definitely think there's... if they actually reached an agreement, cross-party deal, and actually went ahead with that and there was no public vote thing attached, I definitely think people like Siobhan McDonough would defect, yeah.
How many are there left to defect? I'm trying to work it out. Siobhan is an obvious MP to defect.
Yeah.
I think, what do you think?
I've heard that there's about half a dozen apparently waiting on Tony Blair's word.
Is he going to defect?
No, apparently that's...
How many are waiting on Tony Blair's word to leave?
Right, half a dozen.
Half a dozen? 6? I quite like that though.
Tony Blair.
He's like, I was the most successful Prime Minister in Labour history. Now he's got
6
like
MPs.
6 MPs.
All I say, Tony Blair, if you're watching,
replying to
I'm
his
sure Tony
WhatsApp
Blair
messages.
is watching.
He's watching.
He's a regular, isn't he? Tony Blair, if you're watching, please endorse them. Please endorse Change UK.
Also, come on. I'd love it if you came on.
Yeah,
That'd
come on,
be great.
come on
That'd be
to
good
this
fun.
hour. I wonder that who else is like. I don't want to name.
Oh,
them,
this is a
actually,
good
might fuel
question.
it.
This is from Phil BC.
Oh, great bloke.
Great blog. We say
From
that
Stoke.
every time.
He's from Stoke. He's a great guy. Hi.
In the event of another Euro election, do you think Chuck and the Brexit Party will get a load of attention? So that two different parties, the Remainers in Chuck and the Brexiteers in the Brexit Party, who I think are going to be led by Nigel Farage now. You might also have UKIP with someone like Tommy Robinson standing, the new sort of, well, it's always been a populist right party, but now a really far right street party, UKIP. Do you think if those European elections happen, which seems fairly likely at this point, the European Union have said that is a condition of a long extension, they potentially could change their mind at the last minute, but I don't see why they would, because I feel like they want to make life a little bit difficult for Britain, considering we've screwed them around for the last 2 years. I mean, we haven't particularly sort of showered ourselves in pride during this process. If those European elections happen, what do you see as the outcome?
They'll definitely get a lot of media attention, yeah. Definitely the extremes on either side will get loads of coverage, for sure. The results will be really interesting. I wouldn't like to make any predictions. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, I spoke to dissident members of the lobby being the political reporters, journalists of various newspapers and broadcasters, and it was put to me that if you were going to have... This will set them off again, it always does. But if you were going to have a political party to basically, that's perfect.
God. You're going to say this again?
Yeah.
It's spot on, by the way.
For the political lobby, it would be TIG. I mean, they're basically socially liberal, centre-right.
Please don't call them TIG in their cucks.
Oh, sorry, I forgot their cucks. I'm so sorry. I called them the other day on Sky News. I called them the Oompa Loompas for no reason. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. You know, there wasn't an Australian... sitcom where they go, I'm so random, why did I just do that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I literally just went the independent group, Change UK, the Oompa Loompas, whatever they call themselves. But it was like, why did I say the Oompa Loompas? Anyway, that's what I called them. I don't regret it. No, but I think, yeah, I mean, they are ideal for that whole faction within the media. They are, tailor-made
They basically don't really like the Tories and they absolutely hate Corbyn.
Exactly that. Because when sometimes people are like, oh, you just think we're Tories. No, I don't. I think you are, they are, they're not generally people who are conservatives, with some exceptions to be fair. They are generally kind of socially liberal, economically liberal, hate the left. So I think they'll get a lot of attention from a big chunk of the media, including the BBC, because they are tailor-made for the BBC. One senior presenter said to me, a very senior news presenter just said the political centre of gravity at the BBC is basically Blairite. And that's why the left and the right, because sometimes you get people go defending the BBC, well, if they annoy the left and the right, then they're doing something correct, that obviously neutral, which is a logical fallacy, incidentally. It's like saying the left and the right both have criticisms of the criminal justice system, therefore it's getting it right. So in practice, they'll get huge amounts of attention, and obviously the turnout will be quite low, so it won't compare to normal elections. So it will be very easy for a party to make a big splash. And the reason they are desperate for European elections, and they hate the idea of a general election, which will wipe them out. But in a European election, they do have a chance, they think, of getting a foothold, because then they will have to get more media coverage on the basis they just won a significant slice of the European elections.
Yeah.
Proportional representation will help Brexit Party and cucks. And
other
also
parties
the
always do better in European elections.
It's perfect for a protest vote, and there's a lot of reasons to vote in a protesty way.
In 1989, people forget this, the Greens topped the vote. Completely right. Yeah.
1989, the Greens did.
1989, or they came nearly top. Was it second?
I don't have time to check it now. I think we should end the show. It's been an hour. Thank you both for joining me. That was good fun. Yeah, hopefully there'll be more political crises in the next couple of weeks so we can do more emergency shows. As I've already said before, the more money you give us, the more emergency shows we can do, because production don't come for free. Maybe we'll upgrade our software so you don't have to watch for 10 minutes while we get it going at the beginning. But thank you, Sienna Rodgers, for joining us.
Thank you,
Owen Jones. I hope you've enjoyed your tiskies on this pleasant Thursday evening. Thank you for watching. Again, please like this video, please share it on Twitter, please share it on Facebook. I've enjoyed your comments and questions, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.